In today's video, we're going to talk about 5 Yu-Gi-Oh decks that have just completely gone by the wayside, been totally forgotten over the past few years. And if you pay close attention, you'll notice a pretty obvious recurring trend between these decks, so see if you can find it. Deck number 1 is Abyss Actors. They actually recently got a set of new support cards announced that will probably be releasing later this year. I feel like when this deck released, nobody even played it or really talked about it, but it's a really strong pendulum strategy. The basic idea is that you've got pendulum monsters that have a varying amount of effects. Most of them have to do with the battle phase, changing attack and defense or running over opponent's monsters, that type of thing. It has good search power, it has draw cards. The main unique part about the deck though are the Abyss script spell cards. For the most part, just basic, spell and trap support. You gain 500 life points for every Abyss Actor you have in the field. Pretty basic effects, right? Like nothing special. But the Abyss Actor spells, when they get destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you get some really, really nutty effects. And so I like it because it kind of punishes your opponent for, accidentally destroying these cards. It's one of the first archetypes that really feels like based on that outside of maybe artifacts. So like some of the Abyss script cards will literally like banish things from your opponent's extra deck, or let you search like 2 cards from your deck to your hand, or draw until you have 5 cards in your hand. It's a deck that functions totally fine on its own and then just gets a boost if your opponent tries to fight back, and that's something I really like. What's also cool about Abyss Actors is that, like most pendulum decks, they can make somewhat reasonable use of Electromite, which is cool, but they also can recycle their pendulum monsters back to their hand. So they have a couple of different monsters that have effects that like let you add cards from your deck straight to your extra deck, which is cool. It's kind of what Electromite does. And they also have cards that let you recover your pendulum monsters to your hand. So you're kind of able to play around the whole Master Rule 4, 1 extra monster zone mechanic, and that's really cool. All in all, I really like the deck, and I encourage people to play it, especially leading up to the release of more support cards. So deck number 2 is Predaplant. So they've got a lot of powerful fusion boss monsters. They've got the Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, not the one that recently got banned, but a different one, and Greedy Venom, and they also have their own set of Predaplant fusion monsters. What I really like about it is that, unlike most plant archetypes, this one is unique because it uses counters. Whenever your opponent's monsters have predator counters on them, they become level 1, which makes it really hard for your opponent to synchro summon with them and ritual summon with them and that type of thing, Xyz summoning. Also, all of your Predaplant monsters tend to have different effects that involve abusing monsters on your opponent's side of the field that have predator counters. Being able to use your opponent's monsters as fusion material for your fusion monsters, being able to treat them as dark, or negating effects. So there's a lot, and this archetype is actually huge. Like, it's one of the archetypes that has like so many cards, it's actually tough to sort through them all and like figure out what you do and don't want to play. But I think the most unfortunate thing about this is most people only know Predaplants as far as Orphis Scorpio and Darling Cobra, because it like lets you search Instant Fusion and Brilliant Fusion and cool stuff like that. And that's great, but the fact of the matter is those 2 cards actually in a Predaplant pure deck are even scarier. And their fusion monsters are all great. I mean, like Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, like it can copy effects kind of similar to the one that recently got banned. And also when it leaves the field, it just destroys, like it nukes the board. Like it nukes all your opponent's special summon monsters. There's a lot of cool stuff that this deck has to offer, and you get to use a lot of the existing plant support. Miracle Fertilizer, Lone Fire Blossom, all of that stuff comes to mind. It's very easy to implement into this deck. It's a deck that I think more people should give it a try. I mean, it's very cheap to pick all these cards up, and they're all hollow and shiny, so that's nice. I'll probably be building it just for fun because I feel like, why not? I mean, I'm making this video about it, so I definitely should. So yeah, if you haven't heard of Predaplants, give it a look. Third forgotten deck is the Weather Painters. So the Weather Painters were an archetype that a lot of people had a little bit of hype leading up to. I mean, some people thought it was going to be kind of a meta viable deck. Other people were like, well, at least it's a cool concept. I can agree with that part at the very least. I mean, these monsters have great artwork and a nice variety in typing and stuff, but the way that they work is you have your monsters themselves, the Weather Painters. You use a set of continuous spell and trap cards. So the continuous spell and trap cards give Weather Painters effects in a T-zone above them. So it's kind of hard to visualize. Basically, if you have the continuous like spell right here, it gives its effects to the monster in front of it and the monster with the monsters in the 2 adjacent columns beside it. And so it gives your Weather Painters effects like, oh, they can banish themselves to add a card from your deck to your hand, or banish themselves to, do this or do that. And then the Weather Painter monsters, when they get banished to activate their effects, they'll come back in the next standby phase. So it creates this kind of cool stunny control deck where basically you're able to use your weather painters as quick effects, by the way, and like run from your opponent and do some type of disruptive thing, then come back in the next turn. And that allows you to kind of gradually build advantage, sort of ramps up. The big weakness with this deck though is that the weather patterns themselves, the continuous spells and traps, are susceptible to things like MST, of course, and when they're gone, the Weather Painter monsters don't really have any other effects. The monsters need the spells and traps to function, the spells and traps need the monsters to function, and by and large, neither one is really all that searchable. It was a deck that I wanted to build. I wasn't able to get the Snowy Weather Painter because it was kind of expensive at the time, and then since then I kind of just lost interest in the deck. But I think it's a really unique one, so like the other ones on this list, give it a look. Deck number 4 is Magical Musketeers. It's a cool column-based deck, and I really like it for that reason. The way that they work is that the Magical Musketeer monsters, A, let you activate magical musket spell and trap cards from your hand, even in the opponent's turn. That's awesome. And then when a spell or trap card, any spell or trap card, gets used in the same column that a Magical Musketeer is in, the Magical Musketeer then gets an additional effect. So the main one in the deck is Magical Musketeer Caspar. Whenever a spell or trap gets used in the same column as him, he gets to add another Magical Musket card from your deck to your hand. So he's a great way to boost the consistency. He's kind of like the Stratos of the deck. Then you've got Kid Brave, where you discard a card and draw 2 cards, so he's a nice plus. Starfire summons them from the deck. Doc recycles them from the grave. You see where it's going. And then also their spell and trap cards are very powerful effects. They've got, a negate monster effects. They've got a way to double their attack and defense points. They've got, traps that just, they've got Destrudo, which just straight up destroys something on the field, so it's good disruption. They have Last Stand, it's this kind of spell and trap negator card. So they've got good spells and traps, and because you're gonna be able to use those cards from your hand, they can effectively be like hand traps. The deck can make really good use of Ties of the Brethren. All of its monsters have 3 different things that could be summoned with Ties of the Brethren. They've got level 3 light fiends, I believe that's what they are, and then they've also got level 4 ones. So you can use Ties of the Brethren. It's a really great starter card that actually really pushes the deck over the edge, but it does have its fair share of problems. It kind of sucked that it wasn't able to make more of an impact in the meta. I think that since the format is slowing down a bit, it might be better off, but it still has to contend with, some troubles when it goes second, and having to deal with hand traps. Hand traps really bite this deck, Ash Blossom and Ghost Ogre really suck. But that being said, it's a cool concept. I think it's a deck that more people should at least give it a try. I mean, it's fairly cheap now. A couple of the cards do still cost a bit, but yeah, pretty cool deck. And last but not least is Psyframes. Not as forgotten as the other decks on this list, but definitely forgotten in the sense that most people forget just that Psyframes are an archetype. So you've probably seen people taking things like Psyframe Gamma in, lots of decks. It kind of functions as a hand trap. And there's loads of people who will summon Psyframe Lord Omega. But the archetype itself is really cool because if you don't control any monsters, then whenever your opponent does a certain thing, like a spell card or a trap card or a monster effect or whatever, you get to activate the accompanying Psyframe monster in your hand, negate the activation that your opponent did, and destroy their card. Then you special summon your Psyframe from your hand, and then it special summons Psyframe Driver from your hand, deck, or graveyard. And then at the end phase, they get banished. So as long as you're negating your opponent's cards in your turn, then you'll be able to synchro summon with the monsters. If it's in your opponent's turn though, they would get banished in the end phase before then. Unless you have their field spell, which actually lets you immediately synchro summon even in your opponent's turn whenever you use your Psyframe card's effects. And of course, you've got the boss monsters, Omega, everybody knows about him. There's also Zeta, which can get rid of special summon monsters, just run with both of them. There's a trap card that actually lets you get rid of Psyframe monsters in your hand to just straight up banish stuff from the field face down. I think that overall, this deck it's a very defensive deck, it's a very slow deck. People won't really like you for playing it. It wasn't the most popular deck in its time. People probably just forgot about it mostly out of convenience. They're like, oh, if no one thinks about this deck, then no one will play it and it'll be good, which I understand the rationale. It's not my favorite deck in the world. But if you like a kind of unique twist on anti-meta, then I do recommend giving it a try. Conveniently, if you've noticed, all 5 of these decks or archetypes are from those spin-off sets, High-Speed Riders like Wing Raiders, Spirit Warriors, Destiny Soldiers. Let me know if there are any other archetypes that you feel have just gone completely by the wayside, just off the radar, and they're actually decent. I think all these decks are fun, they're unique, and you should give them a try. So yeah, that's it for the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know about other videos. We're also been doing lots of live streams and other fun stuff in preparation of Nats. I'm planning to give away a box of Relentless Revenge when that comes out, so stick around on the channel so you'll hear more details. Yeah, it's gonna be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Give these decks a try. Let me know what you think. Later.